Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a pretty common problem that we all face, which is mainly how to get data flows to run at the right time. Now, spoiler alert, we're going to be using Python and our APIs to do a little bit of automation. So if you're interested in that, stick around. If you're not interested in it, skip to the end and just see it all in action because it's actually kind of cool what we've accomplished. Here's a classic problem. You have 5 input data sets and you want it to run at the right time as soon as possible. And so what you'll do is instead of having the data flow run manually, maybe you'll set it to run on a schedule. So you'd be like, all right, I want it to run once a day. And then your users are like, hey, can we get it to run more than once a day? So then you go over to trigger when the data sets are updated. And you're like, all right, I'll choose all of them. And as soon as the first one finishes, the data flow starts running. But therein lies the problem. If you start your data flow as soon as one data set finishes, then you run into this problem where you're mixing fresh data with stale data. And so then we start like rolling the dice and hoping we get lucky. We're like, well, usually I know that this last data set takes the longest to update and I've got it a little bit staggered or something. So if I wait until just that data set updates, then I'll be good. And that is truly rolling the dice because depending on the day of the week, a different data set might happen to run longer than usual or whatever. And so it's not really a great system here. So can we get the data flow to run at the right time? Well, how do you define at the right time? Let's say for the sake of conversation, running at the right time is when all of my data sets have run within a specific number of hours. If all my data sets ran in the last hour or 10 minutes, however you want to configure it, then trigger my data flow. And if it hasn't run in that amount of time, I want my script to go to sleep for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, and then test again. Have all of my data sets run? If yes, trigger the data flow. I hope you're pretty excited about this because, like I said, I do think it's pretty cool what we've accomplished here. If you're new to the channel, you know that I'm all about that automation game. I've been spending a lot of time hacking at Domo and the APIs, and I really just wanted to share this with the community. So if you want to know, as soon as a video has been uploaded, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Feel free to support the channel. There's some links in the description. I, of course, would really appreciate it. In any event, here we are looking in Domo Jupyter. This is I think it's still technically a beta feature, but it is a feature that you can talk to your CSM to get enabled on the instance. It is a premium feature, so there is a cost associated with it, but you can still take my code and pretty much rewrite it in your local IDE, and it will do the same thing, right? This will still work. Or if you want to translate this into JavaScript, really the learning here is how to do automation with APIs. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load my credentials. Because this video is on the internet, I obviously don't want my credentials in plain text. So I'm using a .env file that I've stored locally in Jupyter Notebook. And that's what I'm going to pull in using the load env library. If I print just Domo instance, we can see I'm running all of my code against domodojo.domo.com. It is a community instance. It's a sandbox instance. Yes, we do have some of the betas that are premium enabled here. We work with the beta team to kind of give you guys access to like a little sandbox where you can play and experiment with things and maybe take some of these tools back to your business. And that's what it's there for. If you're interested in, again, in the description, I'll have a link to the Slack group and emails and all of that stuff. All right, first things first, we have to do authentication. If I want to hit an API, I have to tell Domo, hey, I'm allowed to do that. I have to authenticate. I've talked about full authentication on the channel before, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but it's pretty straightforward. I'm hitting this URL with my username and password, and Domo is going to send back a session token. So when I run my function and I call get full auth, by passing in my username and password, etc., I get back a session token. Now I'm going to have to send that session token into all of the subsequent API requests. And that's why this is, of course, the first thing that we have to define. Cool. As I think about my data flow functions, my interactions are I need to be able to get the definition of a data flow, which includes the input data sets, and I need to be able to trigger the execution of a data flow. Now, if you've been on the channel, you know how I do this. I just kind of inspect network traffic here, and I push a button. And then I jump over to the network tab, and I look for the request that looks like it's doing what I needed to do. So in this case, the post request against Dataflow 77. I've talked about this a couple times, but just so you guys know, I've been doing a lot of scripting in the work that I do, and so I was tired of the APIs not being documented, so I documented them in Postman. This is a resource that I'm happy to make available to the larger Domo community. So hit me up if you've got a API problem you're trying to solve. I probably have that API documented. Well, I think, anyway. Cool. So we get our session tokens. We know we want to get data flow by ID. I need to pass in the instance I want to hit. I have to pass in the data flow ID as well as a session token. And again, it's just that a GET request against this API. For authentication, I add in headers equals xdomo authentication, and then I add in the session token, right? That's the full auth error that you're probably seeing if you're not passing your session token with your API requests. Cool. So when I run this guy, I get my data flow back, and there's a lot of stuff in here. So the actions, this is actually pretty cool. The actions are the individual tiles that you've configured in your Magic ETL data flow. So what am I doing here? What's my action? I am loading data from Vault. Or here I am. Oh, where's an action? Oh my gosh, this is a really long old thing. Depends on, here's my ID. I've got, I'm joining a data set. Okay, so it's a merge ETL tile. It's a merge or a join tile, right? So the actions are like the activities that I'm performing in the data flow, but I also get some other information like what kind of transformation is it? What is the ID? And most importantly, what are my input data sets? And again, we were trying to say, is my data flow ready to run? Well, I know that answer if this data set has run recently enough. Now, this one API didn't give me the information I need, so it looks like I need to hit some more APIs. So, oh, right, sorry. Before we get to those other APIs, the other data flow API that I'm hitting is the execute data flow API, which again, same setup. You have your authentication, but this time I'm sending a post request. Again, this is all in my Postman documentation that I've put together. So yeah. All right. How do I know if a data set is ready? A data flow is ready to execute? Again, I have to get the inputs. I have to get the input data set information, and then I have to determine if my data set ran recently enough. And then if it has, then I want to trigger execution. And if it has not, I want to sleep and then run my test again. All right, so again, in terms of APIs, I need to hit the get dataset by ID API. So that's going to be data sources from data v3, same authentication, no body, just a get request, and return the response. So what did I just press? Whoa, too large, too small. Okay, send. All right, so this is a result of get dataset by ID. It's got the usual culprits. What account is this dataset set up with? What is the ID of the dataset? Who are the owners? But most importantly, what was the last updated date? And this is kind of interesting. What is the current status and state of the dataset? So what I'm going to do is we're going to just really quickly, where's my ID column here? We're going to take this ID real quick and run this data set. All right, that's the data set I'm going to run. Remember here, the state and status are success. I'm going to go ahead and execute. I'm going to start this data set running, and then I'm going to get my definition again. This time, the state is active, the status is success, and the phase is import. So because I triggered my data set to run, its current state is importing. Sorry, I'm using all the wrong words. The phase is import, the state is active. And this is information that you might want to use if you're trying to decide, do I trigger my data flow or not? Do I trigger it just based off of the most recent execution date? Or do I consider these attributes as well? All right. So let's talk about that. I wrote a function called isDatasetReady. And again, in this function, I'm going to say at the end of the day, true or false, we're ready to go. So I'm going to take that last updated column and I'm going to convert it into a time that I can understand. So I'm using the date time from timestamp function. And then to understand if it ran within an acceptable number of hours, I'll compare that to the time right now. So time since update is now minus last updated, which is reported in seconds. So I divide it by 60 for minutes, 60 again for hours. And that's the time since the update in hours. Okay. My response is going to be binary. Is ready is true or false. And my criteria are just if my time since update is less than the acceptable number of hours. But again, if I wanted to, I could consider state and phase in my true false criteria for whether or not the data set is ready. As part of my response, I'm also going to give a reason in text so that people have a reason they can understand why is this data set not ready. So in plain text, the default value for the reason is the data set is ready. But if the hours since update is greater than the acceptable hours, then my new reason is there's been too much time. If I'm considering state, I could extend, my if-else statement. All right. In my response from my isDatasetReady function, I'm going to pass back the ID of the dataset, the name, and most importantly, my binary is ready and the reason. I'm including ID and name not because I have to, but because I want to be able to say, oh, which data set is the culprit. All right. So I know if a data set is ready. Now we need to ask, is a data flow ready? And we'll define the data flow as being ready when all of my inputs are ready. So let's go through that process. In stage one, I get my input data sets. So I hit the I take my data flow definition, I grab the inputs, and from each input, I get the dataset ID. Cool. Now I have a list of my 5 dataset IDs. I then need to get the definition or the information about those datasets. So I'm going to hit that get dataset by ID function that we looked at first. It will return a list, right? 5 dataset definitions. And now for each dataset in my input, I need to run the isDatasetReady function. And my main criteria is, has the dataset run within the acceptable number of hours since my last update? And then I will get my isReady response back. And remember, the isReady response is the ID, the name, as well as just the Boolean, are we ready or not? For documentation purposes, I'm just going to print out the dataset ID with this name is ready or not. Cool. Now, again, the definition of a data flow being ready is when the number of ready datasets is equal to the number of input datasets. So I'm going to take the sum of that Boolean is ready column. If I have 5 inputs and I have 5 trues, a true is the same as 1, so 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 5. And then I can compare that to the number of inputs, which is the length of my input datasets. And that's going to be my data flow is ready test. Is the number of ready datasets equal to the number of input datasets? And again, I'll give a reason just to print. Guys, we're on the home stretch. We now have defined if my data flow is ready. All we got to do is just run a loop and just keep on running every 5 seconds, every 5 minutes, however often, and just say, hey, is my data flow ready to run? If it is, great, run it. If it's not, go to sleep and run it in 5 minutes. So here's my loop. To create a loop, you have to create a condition that says, hey, run my loop again. So my default conditional value will be true. And while is loop again is true, we're just going to keep on doing this. So first things first, I need to get that session token. I need to then get my data flow. I need to then test, is the data flow ready? If the data flow is ready, then I'm going to execute my data flow. Because I executed my data flow, I don't need to run it anymore. I can set is loop again to false, and I can break out of my loop, and we're done. But if my data flow is not ready, we're going to go to sleep for 5 seconds, or however long we set it. And at the end of 5 seconds, because is loop again is still true, I'm going to go back to the top of the loop and run my test again. All right, guys, I know this is the part you've been waiting for. We've been waiting to see if it works. So let's just go. Let's just run it. All right. Testing if it's ready. Stage 1, get my inputs. Stage 2, test if my inputs are ready. So input 1, ready. Input 2 was not ready. Ready, ready, ready. So this guy was not ready. And so 4 out of my 5 data sets are ready, so I go to sleep for 5 seconds. I wait 5 seconds, and then I run through my loop again. Cards and beast modes is still not ready. What are my parameters? I actually kind of forgot, not going to lie. My parameters were, if the acceptable hour since the last update is, it has to be within 1 hour. And then I sleep for 5 seconds. Okay, so let me force this to run. I'm going to go here. Let me get the dataset ID this time. I hope this is a fast one. I don't actually know how long this guy takes to run. I'm going to go ahead and trigger this guy to run. Takes 4 minutes. We're not waiting 4 minutes. What I'll do is I will set the, let me stop my loop. The acceptable number of hours since last date, let's set it to 24 hours. So since it most recently ran 10 minutes, 10 hours ago, this should work. Blast off, right? Because it ran within the last 24 hours, we consider ourselves ready to run, so I execute the data flow again. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Again, for me, how you write the code, how pretty you make it, where you run it, none of those things are important. My goal was to kind of talk through what automation means. I think it's really easy to say, I want you to run at the right time. It becomes more difficult to define our criteria for the right time. And then the second step is like, how do I piece together the information out of the Domo APIs in order to answer that question, and then more importantly, execute my data flow. I hope you guys found this useful. If you have any questions about automation, jump into the Domo Dojo community. I'll link the Slack group and all of that. Feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. Would love it if you would choose to support the channel. But I'll catch you guys in the next one.